Under the collective efforts of Han Li and Patriarch Coldflame, countless five-colored runes surged out of the spiritual light radiating from the five spirit treasures, and they began to revolve incessantly around the spirit treasures. The five balls of spiritual light quickly intertwined and fused together to form an enormous ball of five-colored light, within which the five spirit treasures had formed a circle and were rapidly revolving. With each cycle of revolution, the five-colored ball of light would swell slightly, and it quickly reached over 1,000 feet in size, radiating dazzling five-colored light that illuminated the entire heavens, while Lu Yuqing looked on with a dazed and awestruck expression. Right at this moment, Han Li and Patriarch Coldflame both raised a hand in unison to cast an incantation seal toward the ball of light, and a pillar of five-colored instantly shot out of the ball of light to strike the starry light barrier. The two fused together, and the starry light barrier remained completely unaffected. But if one were to gaze upon this scene from afar, it would appear as if there were a five-colored passageway connected to a vast starry sky. As Han Li and Patriarch Coldflame continued to chant the incantation for the great five elemental true light, the pillar of five-colored light instantly became even brighter, and countless five-colored arrows that were each around 10 feet in length took shape within the pillar of light, before raining down upon the starry light barrier. The still surface of the starry light barrier instantly began to tremble violently, and balls of five-colored light appeared over its surface amid a string of resounding booms. The light radiating from the starry light barrier quickly began to fade, and it was whittled down at a rapid rate. Much to Han Li's surprise and suspicion, the starry light barrier appeared to be extremely profound. So why was it so inept? Despite his surprise, he continued to make a string of hand seals, and more five-colored arrows came raining down from the pillar of five-colored light. As time passed, the starry light barrier was whittled down further and further, and after only 15 minutes, only a thin layer of it was left. Han Li immediately switched to a different hand seal upon seeing this, and Patriarch Coldflame did the same thing at almost the exact same time. The pillar of five-colored instantly brightened, as all of the countless arrows within it fused as one Watt form a giant arrow that was over 1,000 feet in size, with streaks of five-colored light surging all over its surface. A sharp screeching sound rang out as the giant five-colored arrow came crashing down onto the starry light barrier, and an earth-shattering boom rang out as the starry light barrier finally crumbled into countless pieces. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air upon seeing this, and the five spirit treasures in the sky instantly split up, with his three spirit treasures flying back up his sleeve, while Patriarch Coldflame recovered his two spirit treasures as well. With the starry light barrier out of the way, a burst of rich spiritual qi and medicinal aroma instantly began to waft through the air. Han Li immediately flew down, followed closely by Patriarch Coldflame and Lu Yuqing. The three of them landed in the garden in quick succession, and as soon as they did so, balls of starlight abruptly emerged from the stone pillars situated in the four corners of the garden, and they released streaks of spiritual light that began to intertwine in mid-air. In the span of just a couple of seconds, the starry light barrier had taken shape above the garden once again, except it was only a thin layer this time. More streaks of starlight were being released out of the stone pillars to support the light barrier, and it was gradually becoming thicker and more resilient. Han Li took a glance up at the starry light barrier, and his brows furrowed slightly, as if he had realized something. But he then shook his head and withdrew his gaze before turning his attention to the medicine garden around him. The garden had been split up into different sections that were separated by fences. Crafted from a type of green jade material, and each area was enshrouded in restrictions of different colors, with all manners of different spirit plants growing inside them. Han Li cast his gaze toward a section of the garden beside him that was several dozen feet in size. This section was enshrouded under a red restriction with dozens of red spirit plants growing inside. The spirit plants were around 2 feet tall each, and they had ovular leaves with a bright red palm-sized flower at the top of each one, resembling a ball of scorching fire. Even through the restriction, Han Li could still detect the formidable fire attribute spiritual power fluctuations emanating from the plant. These are wild flame herbs. This was a type of renowned fire attribute spirit plant that could be used to refine some top-grade fire attribute pills, and even fire attribute Dao pills. And it was extremely sought after for the fact that, upon reaching 100,000 years of age, there was a very high likelihood that a hint of fire attribute law powers would emerge within the plant. There were very few spirit plants that could produce law powers on their own, and most of them had to be hundreds of thousands of years of age before reaching that stage, so the wild flame herb was very much an anomaly. The law powers produced by this plant weren't particularly formidable, but it could be used for Dao pill refinement, and the age requirement was also quite low, so it was extremely sought after among all Dao pill masters. Furthermore, judging from the size of these wild flame herbs, they had to have been at least 300,000 to 400,000 years old, so the fire attribute law powers that they harbored were naturally going to be far more formidable than in 100,000-year-old specimens. If he could mature them to 500,000 years of age with his heaven-controlling vial, then he would have a batch of priceless fire attribute spirit plants on his hands. However, instead of scrambling to pick these spirit plants, Han Li turned and made his way toward the other sections of the garden. It appeared that no one had been here for a very long time, so there had to be many spirit plants here more valuable than wild flame herbs. Meanwhile, Patriarch Cold Flame and Lu Yuqing had also gone in different directions to search for spirit plants. A short while later, Han Li stopped beside a section of the garden that contained a series of thin purple spirit plants, each of which was only around half a foot tall, and they resembled wheat. These spirit plants were giving off a rather peculiar odor that was both fragrant, yet also a little rank. Han Li was staring intently at these purple spirit plants, paying no heed to their peculiar aroma at all. These were farsight weeds, and they were extremely renowned in the northern glacial Immortal region. Han Li had once read a story about an island by the name of Nightlight Island, situated in the northernmost region of the northern glacial Immortal region. There was a type of spirit hawk that resided on this island, and they only grew to an upper limit of the body integration stage. Furthermore, there weren't many of them on the island, so they never attracted much attention from anyone. That was until a true immortal stage itinerant cultivator caught a Nightlight Spirit Hawk by chance on the island and kept it as a spirit beast. The Nightlight Spirit Hawk's cultivation base wasn't anything special, but it possessed extraordinary eyesight, able to see things tens of thousands of kilometers away. The true immortal cultivator was ecstatic, and he earned himself quite a reputation through this bird. The story of his exploits was eventually leaked, and many cultivators flocked to the island to capture these Nightlight Spirit Hawks, only to find that their eyesight was quite mediocre, and nowhere near as extraordinary as the story proclaimed. The true immortal stage itinerant cultivator was rather surprised to hear this, and he returned to the island to investigate. Only then did he notice that there were several spirit plants growing near the nest of the Nightlight Spirit Hawk that he had captured, and that particular hawk had only attained such exceptional eyesight after consuming this spirit plant. After word of this spread, the spirit plant in question immediately became vastly renowned and was named the Farsight Weed, becoming extremely sought after for countless cultivators. However, Farsight weeds grew very slowly and only in very unique conditions, so they were very rare to begin with, and with so many cultivators going after them, they had been picked to near extinction. No specimen had appeared in the past 1 million years, and Han Li certainly wasn't expecting to see any here. Furthermore, these farsight herbs had to have been at least 200,000 to 300,000 years old, so they were undoubtedly extremely valuable. A hint of elation flashed through his eyes as he cast his gaze elsewhere, and there were extremely precious spirit plants everywhere he looked, many of which had already gone extinct in the outside world. Furthermore, all of the spirit plants in this garden were hundreds of thousands of years old, which meant that they were fit even for refining golden immortal stage pills. Aside from that, there were also several types of spirit plants in the garden that were completely unfamiliar to Han Li, even with his extensive knowledge in the field. However, all of them were brimming with spiritual power, and they were clearly extremely valuable spirit plants as well. Sure enough, the medicine garden hadn't disappointed him. Right at this moment, a burst of rumbling rang out from nearby, and Han Li turned to discover that Patriarch Cold Flame and Lu Yuqing had also begun attacking some of the nearby restrictions. However, these restrictions didn't appear to be all that remarkable, but they were unexpectedly resilient, remaining intact despite the attacks they were being subjected to. Han Li immediately swept a sleeve through the air upon seeing this, and his 72 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords instantly flew out, then circled around in the air before transforming into an azure sword array that encompassed several restrictions at once. Immediately thereafter, countless streaks of peerlessly sharp sword chi emerged at Han Li's behest before striking the restrictions, and they were only able to hold themselves together for a few seconds before exploding violently. With another sweep of his sleeve, Han Li released several hundred dark yellow beans, which transformed into an army of Dao warriors, and with a third sweep of his sleeve, Han Li released hundreds of jade boxes and other types of containers amid a flash of azure light. Collect all of these spirit plants, Han Li instructed. The Dao warriors immediately picked up the containers and began to work. At this point, Patriarch Cold Flame had only just broken through a restriction, and he was collecting the spirit plants inside one by one when he spotted what Han Li was doing, upon which a stunned look appeared on his face. He had already been astonished by Han Li's power, and it came as another shock to him that Han Li also had an army of Dao warriors at his disposal, considering how Dao warriors were notoriously difficult to nurture.